I want to thank Bob Ice for reading the Giving Tree story. Didn't he do a good job with that? Thanks, Bob. Let's give him a round of applause. Bob has one of those great narrator voices, so anytime I need a bedtime story, Bob, I'm going to call you. You can just read me stories to go to sleep. No, anyway. And I asked Bob to read that story because it is such a great and profound story. It was written by a guy named Shel Silverstein. I remember growing up hearing that story, and then we had some other books by him, Where the Sidewalk Ends, which has a lot of short stories and sort of goofy things in it. And I remember thinking, like, man, this guy writes different. And this story of the Giving Tree is profound. But what is it about? Why did he write it? What kind of relationships is he describing in this story? And I was just always sort of, curious about this. Getting ready for today's sermon, I was like, I'm going to do a little bit of research and see if I can find out. And it turns out that I'm not the only one who has been wondering this. In fact, people have different theories about what this story of the Giving Tree is really about. And so here are some of those theories. New York Times reporter thinks it's a cautionary tale of love. And it's one of those things that don't be in a relationship where you're the one always giving and never receiving, because you'll end up like an old stump. And that's what that particular writer thinks. Some think it's a story about a relationship of a parent and a child, and how parents are always giving and giving and giving, and you give so much, and then so that they can have some money, and so they can have a home, and so that they can have adventures, and so that they can learn things. But then often you find yourself without these kids that you spent so much time raising. It just doesn't feel whole to not have them around. So some people think it's about that. Some others think it's in our unhealthy tendency to put money and possessions and adventure above the relationships that should be so important in our life. And yet others think it's a story that points to the sacrificial love that God has for us, and how God shows us that He is willing to give of Himself time and time again, and how we often don't appreciate that love. We don't rest in that love, and then we prefer money and things and adventure, and it's not until we get too old and sometimes too sick to do anything else that we sit and enjoy the presence of God. So which one is it? Which one is this story really about? Which did Shel Silverstein intend? And so there was a rare interview. Apparently he doesn't take many interviews. And they sat down with him and they said, what is the story really about? And he said this. It was about a relationship between two people. One gives and the other takes. And I'm like, really? That's all the explanation that you're giving to us? Like, you're not going to... And what he's really saying is, you figure it out. You decide the meaning. You decide where it goes. And I think we could probably agree that, at least the point of this story is to make us ask the question, are we like the tree who is generously giving? Or are we like the boy who is eagerly taking? And so I want you to think about this question. Are you like the tree who is generously giving, or are you like the boy who's eagerly taking? And a lot of us, our minds will go naturally to the relationships where we tend to give more. And so when you think about this, we have to think about more than one space that we live in. And so when it comes to your family, maybe with your parents or your siblings, are you more, or were you more of a giver or a taker? When it comes to your spouse, are you more of a giver or more of a taker? When it comes to your children, are you more of a giver, or are you one who expects things in return? When it comes to your coworkers and friends, are you the one receiving, or are you the one giving? when it comes to God? Well, you might say, well, God doesn't need anything I have, but yes, he wants something that you have. He wants you. He wants your life. And in your relationship with God, are you a giver of your life to God, or are you someone who's just expectantly waiting for God's blessings to come? When it comes to the church, are you a giver or are you a taker? Are you someone that says, how can I make this church an extension of God's kingdom? How can I serve? How can I grow it? How can I participate in it? How can I make this thing, this gospel that God has given us, extend throughout the world? Or am I just expecting everyone else to give me something great when I come to church? Are you a giver or a taker? It's one of those questions that I want us to think about while we look at this passage in Mark chapter 12. And in Mark 12, it is a story where Jesus encounters givers and takers. Go figure, right? And in this story, he's going to explain some things that Shel Silverstein didn't. And luckily, Jesus doesn't leave us to wonder about all of the meaning of things. He wants us to know specifically what he came to do. While Jesus was teaching in the temple courts, he asked, why do the teachers of the law say that the Messiah is the son of David? David himself, speaking by the Holy Spirit, declared, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. David himself calls him Lord. How then can he be his son? The large crowd listened to him with delight. As he taught, Jesus said, watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting in their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on. And so here's this story about leaders and about this widow and what she gives. And the basic message behind this story is watch out for the teachers of the law. He is pointing out that these are not the leaders that you want to follow. They are not the people that are trustworthy, that you want to give your lives to because they are takers. And so Jesus does 2 things. Number one, he exposes the ignorance and the character flaws of the religious leaders. He wants everyone to know they don't know everything, and he wants everyone to know that they're not perfect, even though it might appear that way on the outside. And the first way he points this out is in Psalm 110, and this is one of those obscure passages that, they knew about, but maybe we haven't focused a whole lot on, and this is a writing of David, and it says, the Lord says to my Lord, which is a strange way to begin a psalm and a quotation. And so everyone sort of knew at this time that this was a prophecy about the Messiah that was to come. And so David says, the Lord, like God, says to my Lord, and a lot of people thought this might be the Messiah, but this was confusing because, after all, how can a descendant of David, which the Bible talks about a lot, be the Lord of David? And so this is kind of confusing, but what Jesus is doing is 2 things. He's telling everyone that the religious leaders, the teachers of the law, don't know everything about the Messiah. And also he's telling them the Messiah is not just a son of David. The Messiah is the Son of God. And he is the Messiah. And so as these unfold, he tells them, watch out for the teachers of the law. And just so you know a few things, the teachers of the law were religious leaders, but they're also part lawyers. So you can imagine, preacher mixed with lawyer. How do those 2 go together? I don't know, but it's an interesting combination, right? And so that was kind of what they were. They believed that God wouldn't bring lawbreakers into their kingdom, and so they thought their job was to make sure everyone kept the law perfectly. They considered themselves smart and important and experts at keeping the law, which we know is just sort of annoying, and nobody likes to be around people who thinks that they have it all together. And they were respected by the people, which is, good for them, I guess, but they weren't liked by the people. They weren't appreciated by the people. No one wanted to spend time with these guys because they were terrible people. And they didn't actually reflect the character that God had. And so the people respected but kept their distance from these leaders. And so Jesus points out all of their hypocrisy. They wear these flowing robes so that they can appear rich and honorable. They greet people in the marketplace just so they can get a greeting of respect back. They want the most important seats. They want the best tables at the banquets. And there's this curious line in here. It says they devour widows' houses. And so if you were a widow within this culture, you weren't really allowed to own property, or at least usually that's how it went. And so it would have to go into some legal thing, and we don't know a lot about this, but through the legal way that things would unfold, these teachers of the law would take possession of the homes of these widows, which is clearly not God's justice at work. And they would become really wealthy so that they would have a lot of money because of how they took money from the poor. And so the teachers of the law, having amassed wealth through unjust practices, would come along with other rich people in this story, and they would give generously from what they had taken from the poor. And so Jesus sits and watches people come and give that would be weird today, wouldn't it? Like, let's put a basket up front and show me your check while you put it in. No, but it's sort of what's happening, and people are noticing these large gifts that are coming in from these wealthy people, and they think, oh, wow, what a religious person, what a spiritual person this is, because they've given such a large gift, not realizing they got that wealth by taking from the poor. So none of it is a part of God's justice. And then there's this woman who comes, and she has these 2 small copper coins. We call it the widow's mite. I have one. If you want to see it later, I'm going to put it back in my pocket. I don't think we can pass it around to everyone. But I have one if you want to see it. Greg Fite gave it to me, and so thank Greg if you get to see it today. It's so small, it's smaller than a penny. It's about half the size of a penny, I would guess. And it was only worth a penny back then. And so she puts these 2 coins in, but the thing is, like, they're all she has. And so when we get to verse 44, it says they gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything she had to live on. And that's an okay translation, but it really doesn't get at the heart at what it is. This word of like whole life is this word bios, which we get our word biology. And so when Jesus says that she came to give all she had to live on, what he really says is she gave her entire life, which is a different meaning than she gave all she had to live on, isn't it? So Jesus watches this happen, and he's moved. He's touched to his heart because this widow's gift of her whole life mirrors the same love that Jesus has for us. And it mirrors what he is about to do on the cross by giving his whole life, shedding his blood, nailing his body to the cross, breathing his last breath. He is going to pour out his life for everyone. And here's this widow with nothing who pours out her whole life before God. And he can't just let it be. He says, no, you don't understand. This woman is the one who gave God what he always wanted. Her whole life. And this is the same thing that God calls each of us to give. What Jesus is saying in this story, in part, is, I am the Son of God, and my knowledge and my character are perfect. In other words, I know all of the prophecies about the Messiah. I know who the Messiah is because I am the Messiah, and the Messiah not only knows the right thing, Messiah is the right thing, does the right thing, is perfect. And so we meet people all the time who say, I want to believe in God, I haven't found the right argument yet. I haven't found the argument that, you can't be refuted. And let me just say, is like, you're not going to find the right argument because that's not what God gave us. God gave us the right person. God gave us his perfect Son. And the life of Jesus cannot be refuted. He's saying, I am the leader who will pour out my life, and all who come to me might have life to the full. So there's this amazing story that plays out in the life. And what God is really saying is, you can trust me. Is it easier for you to trust people? Is it easy or hard for you to trust people? Well, everyone's a little different, right? We all have different experiences. We've been through different things. And, sometimes we've experienced things that make us not want to trust people. And when we don't want to trust people, we don't really want to trust anyone. In fact, we just really want to trust who? Ourselves. Because what we'll say to ourselves is, well, I'm the only person who hasn't let me down. If I want it done right, I might as well do it myself. Now, are any of those things true? Have you ever let yourself down? That's a lie. Have you ever done something that you wanted done right and you did not do it properly? Yeah. We do those things all the time. And so why are we telling ourselves that we can trust ourselves when we have proven to ourselves time and time again that we are not trustworthy? Isn't that funny? Isn't that strange that we would think that we're the most trustworthy one when we know better than anyone that we're not? And so Jesus says, you can trust me. Give up control for me. Give up your self-rule for me. It's not your kingdom, it's my kingdom. Give me what you have considered to be your life and lay it down at my feet. I promise you, I can lead your life better than you can lead your life. Do you believe that? Do you believe that if you submit to God in everything, that he can lead your life in a better way than you can lead your life? See, so many of us struggle with trust because we don't believe that. We believe I can lead my life better than God can lead my life, and so I will give God part of my life, but I will not give him all of my life because I don't trust him with all of my life. I'll be a missionary in Africa if I do. Right? We get fearful of where he's going to take us. If we trust that God will do the best thing for us and his kingdom, if we submit everything to him, he will do the best for us and his kingdom every single time. And what you do will be worse. Right? Trust God, not self. And so we've got to give up this struggle. But it's hard for us to imagine it. I love this story. I've told it before. I'm not sure if I've told it here, but it's about a man who is a tightrope walker. And he was a tightrope walker many years ago, and his name was Charles Blondin. And here's a story from what he did during a tightrope walk he did over Niagara Falls. On June 30th, 1859, a daring French tightrope walker named Charles Blondin stretched a rope across the mighty Niagara Falls. Before a crowd of 10,000 spectators, he performed the seemingly impossible walk across the rope. The excitement was palpable. Sensing the public's appetite for more thrills, Blondin's and his manager, Harry, announced, "Come back next week for even greater stuff." I mean, that sounds like a good manager, right? He's got to pump the crowd for more. The following week, an even larger crowd gathered, and he did not disappoint. Each week, the stunts grew more daring. He crossed with a sack over his head, rode a bicycle, carried a stove. He even made an omelet while on the tightrope. I can't even imagine how you do that, but that's what he did. He did handstands and somersaults and more, and as the summer drew to a close, he knew he had to end with something even more spectacular. He said, "I'll carry a man across my back." The announcement created a sensation, drawing a massive crowd of 100,000 people. There was one problem: they needed a volunteer to do it. They advertised a reward of $1,000. That was a lot of money back then. Many showed up, enticed by the offer, and were put through sort of rigorous trials, and he demonstrated his prowess and how he could do it all with a 200-pound sack on his back. And he, one by one, he asked them, "Do you believe that I can do this?" And everyone's like, "Yes, yes, we have no doubts about it. You can do it." And he asked, "Okay, which one of you is going to do it?" And not one of them volunteered. Not one of them. Eventually, he had to get his manager to do it. With much reluctance, his manager, Harry, decided that he was going to climb on his back and cross the falls with him. But Harry's fear caused him to try to balance as they swayed back and forth on the rope. Blondin shouted, "Harry, until I clear this place, you must become a part of me, mind, body, and soul. If I sway to the right, you must sway with me. Don't correct it. If I sway to the left, you must sway with me. Don't adjust. Do not attempt to balance yourself. If you do, we will both perish." What did Harry think he was doing on that tightrope? Did he think he was the world-famous tightrope walker? No. If Harry went on his own, do you think he would fare very well? No. He would be a terrible tightrope walker. His first attempt across, he would plummet to his certain death. And yet, atop the back of the most world-famous tightrope walker, he decided in his mind he could do better. Isn't that just like us? By the way, they made it across safely. Some of you are like, what's going to happen? Isn't that just like us, though? We seem to think that we can do better than God. But it's only by trusting in Him. It's only by giving our life to Him in service to His name and His kingdom that God will steady our lives, that God will make them great, that God will bring glory to His name and to ours because He shares His glory. This is the way we are to live. And so this is what we must do: give our whole life in service to the one who gave it all. And some of you are doing that. We're all doing it imperfectly. But sometimes we have more to give and we hold back because we don't want to give up our control. We had our youth group this week go and serve people at Camp Sozo. And they served those who are in the Ocala National Forest. They don't have much, and so they come together for this camp, sort of a break from the poverty that they live on the daily basis. And they made things, and they spent time with these kids, and they served them, and some of it was hard. They were fixing some houses, and I don't know all of what they did, and so I'm just showing pictures. But they served, they gave. Why? Because Corey told them they were going on a youth trip, right? Well, hopefully there's more to that. They gave because God is the giver. And many of you give because you realize that God is the giver. I convinced Bob Ice to be in a video that I would show here on Sunday. Bob gave because he's the giver. Do you know when he did that? While he was doing touch-up paint in the hallways of our church. Why did Bob do that? Why has Bob been cleaning out closets around here? Don't you know, Bob, you should be living the great life on a boat. And, retired life, living it up. Eat, drink, and be merry. But Bob wants to be like the giver. And so he gives. John Bowling has spent untold hours helping us set up our new live stream system. Does he do it for credit? No. Don't you know, John, you could have more fun doing other things. Why does he do it? Because God is the giver. I could call Kim Bowling tomorrow and say, hey, the next day we're going to have a lunch for 150 people. Can you set it up? She would say yes. Why? Because she knows that God is the giver, and she wants to be a giver too. Many of you gave generously to our Beyond campaign, and why did you do that? Because you wanted your name on a plaque? No, you do it because God is the giver. Houston takes care of some of our older members. He picks them up and visits them and loves them. Why does he do it? Because God is the giver. Ken Pence spends gobs of time working with our missions effort in Nicaragua. So it can grow, so God's kingdom can grow there. Don't you know, Ken, you could be playing more golf. You could be catching bigger fish. You could have these grand tales to tell, but none of it is as good as if we help God to bring his kingdom. And if we become like God because he is the giver, don't you know this is what our lives are to be about? Many of our women make home-cooked meals for those who are sick or recovering from loss, and you ladies are givers. Why do you do it? Because God is the giver. Sometimes I hear people say, well, I'm tired of giving. So-and-so is not pulling their weight, and this group should be doing more. You know why we say that? We've probably all said it. It's okay. I'm not trying to make anybody feel guilty. We say it when we lose connection to what Jesus did for us. We say it when we forget that God is the giver, so we are givers too. We do these things not for recognition, but because we love God. We want to serve him and grow his kingdom. I want all of us to strive to be like this widow who gave her life, to be like the tree who wasn't concerned for itself but was concerned for the boy, to be like Jesus who gave it all so that God could be glorified. And when we do this, because I believe that we can, God is going to send ripple effects through our lives that will bring so much joy and peace and love and peace and patience and kindness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control, and it will be so sweet to all who see it that they'll want it too. Church, it's time to be like the giver who paid it all for us. Let's pray, and then we'll sing a song. During the song, if you guys want to come forward, if you want to express your desire to be a giver or be baptized into Christ, you can do that.